I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-creating curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Time for Teachership podcast. I am delighted to tell you that this episode is going to be implications for student-led discussions based on the brilliant experts we had on the podcast for our July series. And I think one actually aired last week in October on facilitation of teachers and teacher groups. And so I'm really excited to think about how these adult level strategies and protocols are going to work with our students, particularly around discussing controversial or high emotion topics. Here we go. The first idea is from Dr. Chad Dumas, whose book we talked about in last week's episode and was all about kind of supporting teacher teams. Now, what I want to pull from that book that is relevant for students, I think, is to set up the foundational culture. So if you want more on the things he says, check out episode 231. He talks about a Paulo Freire quote that's basically like, we can't have trust without dialogue. And that is so critical. This idea of trust and student-teacher relationships is so common, but also student-to-student relationships is so common in what we talk about, but how do we do it, right? To be able to have dialogue, we often say we need trust. But that's a wonderful kind of flipping the idea on its head to say we actually need dialogue in order to have trust. So let's do it. Let's show the kids, let's show ourselves, right, that we can do this thing and we can do it, right? I love that Dr. Dumas defines Edmondson's psychological safety term, right? Psychological safety being the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. He has a bunch of items that I think you could kind of use for a climate survey just to kind of note whether or not, you have the presence of psychological safety. And so you can kind of itemize this for your students to determine, do I have these or not? Is this present in our environment? So I'll read some of those to you now. If I make a mistake on this team, it's not held against me, right? I would say of this class, right? Members of the class are able to bring up problems and tough issues. We're able to accept others for being different. It's safe to take a risk here. It's not difficult to ask other members for help. No one would deliberately act in a way that undermines my efforts. And when working with others, my unique skills and talents are valued and utilized. So, think about that for students. Are those things present? Also, thinking about a particular action that Dr. Davis talks about, I loved this tip and we talked about it in episode 231, but I just really loved it for students. We often talk about, norm or agreement generation and co-creating those with students, but how do we maintain accountability for things like this? It is so hard to have even adults remain accountable to the things that they co-created, that they agreed to live out in discussion. So his suggestion is that you randomly assign agreements to break to different students throughout the year, right? And that's a way to test if students are going to hold them accountable. And I think you could even say to students, I'm going to randomly assign students to break these. So we never know if it's like someone's actually breaking the agreement or if it's just they were told to break the agreement, which also I think lessens the tension or people-pleasing attitudes of like, oh, I don't want to correct a student or this feels uncomfortable. Like, well, it's part of assessing our ability to hold each other accountable. So love those ideas from Dr. Chad Dumas. And again, this is episode 231 if you want more on his ideas for facilitating teacher teams. Dr. Laura Lipton, we talked to in episode 220. And for this, I want to pull some ideas around designing the conversation with purpose. So the biggest thing I think that we really parsed apart in that conversation and is really, really important, both for adult planning of meetings and PD, but also for students, what we would often call like a class discussion, but students' conversations in the classroom. We need to know what the purpose is, and then we're going to design accordingly, right? So I think let's parse apart her definitions, and I think we can figure out how best to move forward once we know what our goal for the conversation is. So
three types of kind of discourse, she says. One is dialogue. So this is the non-consensus model. You just want a lot of ideas. Every idea is kind of welcome, right? We're just brainstorm mode. And we're cultivating a spirit of inquiry by sharing everybody's voice, everybody's perspective. It's not about agreeing with each other, but we're really in seeking to understand mode. So we might really have some questions to just make sure that we get what all of the ideas are. We're not saying I like that or I don't like that, but we're just kind of, okay, here's all the things that are possible if we are, for example, generating ideas for a civic action project. If we are trying to grapple with a really sticky, interesting, compelling question or essential question for an inquiry circle, for example. Like, let's get it all out. What are our initial ideas? Okay, then, and again, this can progress one to the other. Like you could design kind of a sequence of class conversations, or I think, you could go out of order, as Dr. Lipton told us in that episode where we talked together. So the second piece or type of discourse is discussion. And so this is moving from dialogue where we have many, many ideas. Now, a discussion is a little more discerning, she says, right? You're breaking the ideas into smaller components. And so the purpose of discussion specifically is to generate and analyze ideas and also to define the success criteria. So your goal here in this type of conversation is actually to choose one or maybe more than one idea and move towards action. So again, you could see for a civic action project, this is like, what will we do for a project, or what is our next step for gathering data or whatever. But also for a conversation about a concept, if you're discussing an essential question or the discussion question for the day, right? We want to figure out where we're landing. And we don't all need to land necessarily in the same place, but it would be pretty cool if we kind of have this synthesis of ideas of where we are collectively landing and to kind of have broken apart the pieces of our understanding and analyze all that stuff, right? So I imagine this working really nicely with a question stem like, what would an equitable world look like? So I envision someone saying like, okay, well, here are the success criteria. And so we have to discuss that. We have to agree on the success criteria of an equitable world, right? And then we're going to throw out some of those ideas or pull those ideas from the dialogue part, analyze them, and figure out which of them most align to our success criteria. And then we can go forth and kind of propose as a group, what our idea is. I could also envision this happening in smaller groups. So a discussion could happen, not class-wide necessarily, but this could be, a group of 5, a group of 10, and having multiple groups within the class. And this is kind of the approach that they're taking to get their poster or, success list or whatever ready for you to present to the wider class. So I think there's a lot of different formats this could take. But discussion, the purpose really being we're choosing something at the end that we're going to move forward with. We're either going to implement it or we're going to share it widely with the whole class, with external audience members, whatever that is. Okay, and then the third type of discourse that Dr. Lipton talks about is decision making. So this is after we generate ideas, we parse them out, the group can move to that choice making, right? And there might be predetermined criteria. You might have decided that. You might kind of parse that out a little bit more here. But the goal on this is that you're agreeing on the most viable outcome based on that criteria and building on the previous discourse steps. So when you have kind of dialogue, you're very broad, right? Discussion, we've kind of figured out this is kind of a narrowed version of what we're going to implement. We're going to move toward action. We're going to define our success criteria, whatever. Decision making is like, we're really going to take that. Or you could also skip that step, right? And have predetermined criteria that's provided by the teacher, right? What's an equitable world look like that has X, Y, Z, for example. But that here, you're saying, okay, so based on the criteria that we agreed on, based on like all of these components that we really got to in discussion mode, now we're going to build on that and we're going to come to kind of our final decision. And that there might be some protocols specifically in here to make sure that we have consensus. So I am imagining this happening, right? We have the question like, what would an equitable world look like, right? We have dialogue where we're just kind of all over the place. Maybe that's whole class. Here's all the ideas. Now we break into groups for discussion. Now, each of these groups are coming up with a success criteria. What does it mean to have equity in the world? Here are some of our ideas. We're going to pitch these to the whole class. And now, as a whole class, potentially, this does not have to go this way, but as a whole class, we're learning everyone's pitches. We're kind of seeing what the outcome of those discussions in smaller groups are. We're kind of evaluating all those success criteria, and we are kind of coming to consensus, not necessarily 100% agreement. I like to think of the fist to five as a consensus protocol, to say 3 and above is agreement, I can live with it, right? 5 out of 5 would be like, yeah, I really like it. And we're kind of coming to consensus. Maybe that means we're going to take pieces of this group's ideas of equity and pieces of this group's, and we're going to put them into something new, but we're making a final decision. We're coming to consensus as a whole class. Again, just one way I'm conceptualizing this. I'm sure there are many, many others. Okay, now McCanders, Carolyn McCanders, episode 221, if you want to learn more about her. She has a lot of stuff, I think, that is relevant during a class discussion. So, okay, we're having a class conversation. We've kind of planned it out. We've talked about kind of setting the foundational culture with Dr. Dumas. With Dr. Lipton, we talked about designing the conversation with purpose. We got to figure out if it's dialogue, discussion, or decision-making that's going to happen. And then we plan the prompt, we plan the setup, format, everything's ready to go. Now we're in the discussion. What do you do as the teacher or as the facilitator? Again, this comes from facilitating adults. That's where the original book came from. So you can imagine its applications, I think, really nicely as a teacher facilitating a student conversation. So here we go. We could record indicators of engagement. I love that she talks about the nature of participation. I think there are so many of us who have, sat with a list of student names and kind of checked, oh, they talked, right? Later on in my teaching, after I initially did something like this, I wanted to really think about, were they asking a question? Were they sharing a claim? Were they sharing evidence? Were they inviting another student to talk? So what she names as like kind of the elements or different types of participation is the use of inquiry, right? So I can imagine that could be a question or showing curiosity in some way. Advocacy, so kind of a statement or kind of claim aligned. And paraphrasing. So kind of evidence that you are listening and you're trying to move the group towards synthesis or identifying the various pieces present in the conversation. So really being an effective group member here. And I think you want to teach paraphrasing. So McCanders, you can tell from the title of that episode on our show, paraphrase your butt off is a common phrase that she uses quite effectively. And she talks about, 3 types of kind of paraphrasing in here. And she talks about, acknowledge, organize, and abstract paraphrasing are the ones she writes about in the book. But in the podcast, she actually gave us some examples and some new names for some that I really found compelling, both for adults and for students. So here's one. One is just kind of acknowledge emotions, right? I think this is basic, but so important. She says, if people want to have their emotions acknowledged. And she says, I always say you've got to be able to paraphrase emotions and content while keeping the resourcefulness of the person or the group. So she uses this phrase, your paraphrase should light a pathway. And she talks about how, if we're in a group with adults and we're talking about frustration with family members not coming to a particular thing, right? We can root that in like, oh, I hear your frustration because I know that you are excited to build something together with family members to better have a better experience for your students in school, right? Like your commitment, the desire that you have is why you're frustrated because you're committed to this thing. And it leads them down the pathway to positive action and not just ruminating on, the feelings and getting kind of stuck in kind of a negative state. So there's this idea of acknowledging emotions. We acknowledge it, we paraphrase what we're noticing, and this becomes an opportunity to kind of anchor in or understand the why or move toward action. Then we have common ground. I love this. So this really listens across diverse perspectives. She says, reaches in and grabs out a common value, common belief, common identity, a common goal, and offers it to the group so they can kind of move forward together. I love this idea of, we're kind of all over the place. I think about a lot of conversations that we hear in media, with adults, with students, everywhere, right? Where we're kind of entrenched in positions and we're kind of speaking across a divide. But how cool would it be to reach in and grab a common goal or value, right? We're all working towards this thing. We all care about this thing. We all value this. right? I mean, I'm just going to grab something, but like we all value freedom or the ability to make our own choices, right? Okay, great. So we can ground in that. Now, where do we move from here? Knowing that that's important to us all, right? The next piece is kind of, I think, where you could absolutely get some great nuance. I love this, is kind of polarity paraphrasing. So it normalizes the tensions within a group and it says, you know what, you're right and you're right. Your underlying values, your polarities, and again, you want to use this when we are having, I always think of Dr. Diana Hess's term here, or phrase that she shared on the podcast in a while back, and a year or so ago on the podcast, competing good values, right? So competing good values, not like offensive hate speech, right? But when we are talking about good values, freedom versus safety, right? Both of you are right? And we actually need each other because polarities are interdependent. You can't put one down, she says, if you expect a positive outcome. Both the answers are needed for positive outcomes. I love how she explains this, right? Both are needed. Freedom and safety are needed in kind of tension with each other. We can't have all of one to the exclusion of another. So I love this idea of just, again, think of a student. I think it would be great to do as a teacher, but even better if you can teach students to do this. Think of a student listening to people and being like, okay, I acknowledge these emotions. Like, I see that you're feeling really upset by this, or I'm feeling you're very frustrated by what's happening in the world today. Right? Acknowledge emotions, paraphrase. I noticed that we're all talking about these different ideas. It seems like we're all interested in this idea of freedom, common ground, paraphrase. Oh, that's so fascinating. I'm hearing a lot of people talk about gun control from the perspective of freedom, and also people talking about the perspective of safety. That's so interesting that we have this polarity happening, right? Freedom and safety. Polarity, paraphrase. Now, I imagine you're thinking, okay, my students are not going to speak like that, Lindsay. Sure. But how cool would it be if they could start to identify some of these things? And again, we have to teach it, but I think they're definitely capable of doing it. And how cool once we can sit back and just observe and listen to them be awesome, as opposed to like us constantly having to do it. I think we do it to model at first, but I think this would be super cool if we're talking about a true student-led conversation.
Hi, this is Leah popping in to share the free resource for this episode, a slide deck co-creating class agreements. You can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaywithlyons.com/blog/232. Now back to the show.
McAndrews also talks about never letting a conflict go to waste. It's a whole segment of her book. And one of the protocols that she suggests is an assumptions wall. So really just bringing that cognitive conflict to light that preserves kind of that psychological safety we talked about at the top. So here's where we would have each individual list assumptions about a topic. So we're having a discussion about a topic or a conversation about a topic. Let's list the assumptions, choose one that most informs their behavior, and then write it, kind of like a short phrase. She says 8 to 12 words, like a short sentence, write it on a sentence strip or post it, put it on the wall. And then the facilitator, or you as the teacher, is going to model inquiry, right? So she talks a lot about how to do this, but we basically want to invite conversation about, for example, I'm curious about this. Can you help me understand what it is that you value about this, or what's the belief underlying this, or what data informs this? Why is this so important to you? That kind of thing, right? So we're modeling those inquiry questions, and then the students kind of take over the inquiry, kind of a round robin fashion. She's saying this will take about 15 to 25 minutes. And you could really do this in smaller groups of like four to six. So this could be a protocol where if you have a conversation that is either just beginning and we feel like we want to get some assumptions out there, or we kind of have the conversation, we have this point of stickiness. We're like, ooh, we're stuck here. Let's try to move through it by unearthing some of those assumptions. I think that could be used there as well. I do want to note too, in the book, she talks about how teaching groups ways of addressing conflict generates high interest. So that is super fascinating to me on a meta level, right? Of students just learning how to address conflict in a healthy way. That actually we do want to nurture conflict as long as it is perceived as psychologically safe. But students are actually interested in that, and adults are interested in learning how to navigate conflict because it's relevant in their own lives. So when we're thinking about increasing motivation and engagement, I know we may feel a tendency to avoid conflict. But actually, if we can get through it positively, right, and we can teach how to nurture it and parse things apart and paraphrase in these ways, that actually it's going to be beneficial to student motivation. Fascinating. Okay, final tips and inspiration from our 3 brilliant authors and podcast guests. So from Dr. James, basically, kids can do it. So he cites Ferrari and Rizzolatti, I hope that's correct. In 2014, they talked about we're hardwired to, quote, understand the intentions of others. And they say this is because, we have the quote, capacity to infer others' internal mental states and ascribe to them a causal role in generating the observed behavior, end quote. So basically, we are hardwired as human beings to know kind of what's going on with people and say, oh, that behavior, that's a result of that feeling, right? That's a result of that. I think about that a lot with kids. That kid being tired. Like, I know that. I can sense that kid being tired, right? That's where that's coming from, all right? Or that kid is really sad about something that happened in their life, and maybe that's connected to this topic. That's where that behavior is coming from. They just snapped at me. I understand that's coming from an emotion of sadness, right? Or anger. From Dr. Lipton. She says, quote, I think we really confuse purpose with tasks. We're not here to rewrite math curriculum, for the teacher example. We're here to ensure there's equitable and effective approaches to math for all our kids. That's the purpose. To do that, we're going to take a look at the curriculum, end quote. I think about this a lot with student conversations as well. The purpose is not to answer the essential question necessarily. I mean, yes, it is. But more importantly, lifespan-wise, I want students to be able to have conversations. I want them to be able to exist in conversations about high emotion topics, about politics, about current events, whatever it is, and do well. Like, feel psychologically safe, help spread the psychological safety to others, nurture conflict and have disagreements while paraphrasing effectively and being an effective participant, right? I think that is far more critical than them being able to answer an essential question with 3 pieces of evidence, and a claim. From Carolyn McAnders. Basically, there are several questions, she says, you can ask yourself as a facilitator to make sure that you are thinking in the mindset that you need to be to effectively facilitate conflict-rich conversations. Here they are. Realize the, quote, nice thing to do is speak up. So if you notice someone inflicting pain, saying something oppressive, like, you need to speak up, right? And I would also say this is true for students as well. As a facilitator, ask how valuable is my personal comfort compared to the effort I would have to make to result in long-term gains for others, right? Think about the learning opportunity that is missed if you don't hop in and say something or nurture a conflict that is happening, right? When you are silent, when someone says something, if someone says something oppressive in a conversation, ask yourself, who am I or we protecting by not speaking? And how might this be affecting student learning? So many positive, rich things to do. And if you are thinking the what if, I'm afraid that students are going to say something problematic or that will harm others, I think you follow all of these pieces early on, the whole setup, and then Carolyn McAnders' final tips for us are kind of the, if this happens, you jump in. And here are some questions, right, and some mindsets to coach yourself on to make sure that you do hop in effectively. Okay, you got this. I am so excited to hear and learn and just be in space with you as you share about all of the brilliant student-led conversations that are happening in your schools and districts. Feel free to grab my freebie for this episode, which is the Culture of Discussion playlist. I should probably rename that. Now, discussion I know is different from dialogue, which is different from decision-making conversations. Thank you, Dr. Laura Lipton. But it is available for you at the blog post for this episode, lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/232.
If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no strings attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact.
Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.